What's up, guys? Hope you have a fantastic week so far. Again, because your Stars versus Warhammer video. I know it's been a while, and I apologize for that. I just had to get enough time to sit down and actually record the whole video in one go. I didn't want to do parts. I didn't want to split in half. I didn't want to do any of that because that just ruins the experience. I'm not doing that because I hate when other people do that stuff. I'm not a fan of it. So if I can avoid it, I totally will. But I'm hyped as shit for this because every episode has just been getting better and better, and I feel like now we're about to have like not the climax, but like when it all comes full circle, like the first battles, besides when the public got their shit shoved up their ass, but but the first actual like massive battle, and I hope it's gonna happen because I need it to happen because I just want it. I just want it. I just want these two forces just clash and just go at it, man. So that's what I'm hoping for, but. Like always, though, this creator's done a phenomenal job making not only this entire series, but also just have each character have their own depth and just how it all intertwines has been written so well. So please show them some love in the description. If you guys enjoy content, if you guys enjoy reactions, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get to it.
The enemy has no remorse for the worlds it destroys.
The Old Republic dialogue.
Everything we value
Oh,
will
yeah.
die unless we hold the line.
This shit was peak, man.
This
I
war
remember
isn't
that
about
we
politics
reacted
or
to it.
resources. We fight for survival, for freedom, for the Republic!
An army, baby. Season 7 of Clone Wars was just awesome, man. I wish I could watch it again, like, fresh. Some peak shit, dude. You can't get better than that, man. You can't. Unless maybe like Warhammer released like a movie or something, but still, man. Star Wars just hits different, bro.
Captain Yoren had been trained and raised fighting one enemy, or at least one enemy above all others. Yes, he had dueled pirates within the ashen nebulas of the corpse worlds. Yes, he had rained fire down upon traitors in the pearlescent cities of St. William's Verge. Yes, he had even chased and failed to catch the mysterious shadow pirates of Corsican. But more than anything else, Captain Yoren had been sent to kill greenskins. When he lay bleeding and maimed on the bridge of his first, now dead
Works,
ship,
man.
It was in the eye of a green skin that he left his father's heirloomed power saber. When he finally decided he would commission the tech priests to replace his worn vocal cords with something better, it was when he felt blood spatter his mouth as he screamed the command to fire into a green-skinned pirate cruiser. When he, through the vocalizer in his throat, ordered his ship to aid in the first exterminatus of his career, it was a green-skinned planet which he raised. So, when he watched the ships of the alien republic exit the warp, or whatever it was they used in its place, hauling 2 enormous asteroids, he knew exactly what they intended. "Move the Hell Smasher to parallel the incoming rocks. We'll burn them with our broadsides, and then scourge anything that survives with torpedoes. Emperor willing, whatever's left will burn up in the atmosphere," he ordered. His crew jumped straight into action, fingers, hands, and mechadendrites sweeping over control panels as orders were radioed or otherwise relayed down to relevant decks. The smaller attack ships, Acclamator-class corvettes, from what Captain Yoren had been told, were hauling each of the large space rocks with towing cables, 4 to each rock. No doubt they intended to use these asteroids as brutal dropships or as physical weapons to attempt to crush his cruiser or the smaller escorts he had with him. It was folly. He would never allow it. "Cut us close. I want our lance cannons right in their faces. If they are anything like the orcs, they have armored those rocks internally to a ridiculous excess. Any weapons ports detected on them yet?" "No weapons ports. 2 sealed entrances detected on each. Our specs are returning power readings, but nothing that indicates charging weapons," answered one of his bridge crew. "Captain, shields detected around each of the rocks, and the acclamators escorting them are breaking off." "Breaking off?" he asked. The tech adept nodded. "They are detaching cables. They have flung the rock, sir. Current target is our cruiser and the planet behind us." "Then it is as I suspected," the captain said, stroking his oiled beard as he watched the readings before him reinforce his experience. "When it comes to Xenos, it pays to be daring. All ahead, fool!" he called, confident in the simplicity of the enemy's response.
Great idea, man.
Confident that, of the Xenos he was facing, those of the Republic favored the tactics of the Orcs and not those of the Eldar.
Ooh.
But if confidence could unmake folly, the throne would never have been sat. "Then it is understood?" Anakin asked. He stood in the nearly pitch-black darkness of the innermost hangar of the Verpine colony. All possible power had been diverted into the abandoned colony's impressive shield generators, which Anakin was sure they would need soon enough. Already they were tumbling through space towards their targets as Captain Spikes and the rest of the volunteer acclamators pulled away from the now free-floating colonies. Around Anakin stood nearly 2,500 Jedi and the remaining men of the 501st, specifically Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Captain Rex, the now patched-up members of Clone Force 99, and Deputy Commander Ahsoka Tano. Ayla, her former Master Voss, Shaak Ti, Master Plo, and Commander Bly were also present, though only as sky-shaded holograms. All, physically present or not, nodded their heads. "Then let's mount up. They will start opening fire in minutes. Your targets are flagged. If you get lost, just follow your team leader." And with those words, the groups began to divide, walking to their respective teams and craft with grim determination and eager resolve unbefitting of Jedi, but entirely worthy of knights. However, as the teams began to move, Ahsoka suddenly found herself held up as a hand grasped her wrist. Looking back, she found her old master, Anakin himself, holding her wrist. He released and smiled sheepishly. It had been a few weeks since they had last been face to face and in one place. He was still hoping she would rejoin the Order soon. But Ahsoka herself felt no sign of that happening.
Does this take place around season 7 then?
Hey, thought we should talk a little before we go in. I missed you at the meeting. Something the matter? He asked. Ahsoka sighed softly but smiled a genuine, if tired, smile, and turned to fully face him. "No, of course not, Master. It isn't you I've been avoiding," she said. "Then who?" he asked. "Obi-Wan?" She didn't answer right away, and Anakin's face fogged with a light scowl. "What has he said to you? I hope he hasn't—" "No, no," she said, raising a hand to stall him. "He hasn't said anything much, and that's the problem. Master Windu, Voss, and the others, I fear that they are losing themselves to this war, and especially to this new enemy. And while I do not think Obi-Wan is there yet, I don't see him resisting as he should. I mean, you saw the meeting, didn't you?" Anakin rubbed his head. "Well, sort of. I could see what Hondo was sending you, but not your responses. Ahsoka, what is this really about? Obviously you know we can't pull punches with these guys," Anakin said.
Clearly.
"I know that, Anakin," she snapped back. "I'm the last one who wants to give ground to these fanatics, but that isn't what I'm talking about. At the meeting, Mace put hurting the Piastia above saving the people of Axum. He may not see it that way, but that is exactly what he did. We are not supposed to be soldiers, Anakin. We're supposed to be Jedi. We shouldn't look at this war like generals. We should look at it like heroes. The heroes the people desperately need and don't have right now," she implored him. Anakin felt conflict ripple across his mind as Tarkin's words from their meeting weeks ago echoed ominously within his thoughts. "We may not have that luxury anymore, Ahsoka," Anakin began to say. "It's not a luxury!" she yelled, drawing many eyes, though she cared not at all. "Stop saying things like that," Anakin's former Padawan pressed. "Acting like Jedi isn't a luxury, it is a duty. It's a duty the Order has been neglecting for far too long, and the people out there, the people we are supposed to be defending, have been sorely missing it. This is the reason that I left the Order to begin with, because you taught me how a Jedi should act, and the members of the Council are not acting that way anymore." Anakin felt his head spin.
Deep.
On one hand, he agreed with her, agreed so much his heart cried out to endorse her statement right away, and yet, could he do that without breaking with reality? Had not the Jedi been failing in the war against the Piastia? Was the answer not to become more extreme, at least as extreme as those they were trying to fend off? "Ahsoka, I hear what you're saying, but our first duty is to defend the Republic. We need to keep the big picture in mind," he said. Ahsoka stepped away at that and shook her head. "You need to wake up, Anakin. All the Order does. Our duty is not to the Republic. It is to the people of the Republic. If we continue down this path, we may win the war, but the Order will lose that which made us Jedi. And once we've lost that, there isn't a war we can fight that will give it back. I understand your frustration, I really do. But how can we lead against this war if we do not act as generals?" Ahsoka did not answer right away, turning around towards her Droch-class boarding ship, Rex and several others waiting for her beside it. "I don't know. All I know is this. Our path is not supposed to be an easy one, but it is supposed to be the right one. You have been one of the most righteous and heroic Jedi I've ever known, and I've lived in the Order all my life. I just don't want to see that change," she said, walking away towards her ship.
She's got
as
a
she
valid ass
did.
point though, man. I ain't gonna
"Ahsoka!"
lie.
Anakin called
she's got a
after
good
her,
point.
but a hand on his shoulder held him back. He turned to see Obi-Wan Kenobi. "It's almost time, Anakin. Let's give her some space."
Because a big thing that happened bad, or that went down with the Order, is that they never got out of their own old habits, their old traditions, and they became blind to the dark side. That's kind of left to their inevitable downfall. Is because of that. It's the same reason why they didn't give Anakin, the rank of master. That was too immature and whatnot. But at the same time, he was arguably the best Jedi in the entire war. It was just those kind of things that led to, Darth Vader rising up, the Emperor taking over, etc., etc., etc.
He said amicably. Anakin shrugged off his
The lore's
hand,
deep, man.
but
It's good,
nodded,
though.
following after him for a time, both of their ships lingering in the same direction. "She is just so stubborn," Anakin said. Obi-Wan smiled knowingly at that, but said nothing. "I mean, I see her point, but doesn't she understand how many people have already died fighting these fanatics? And if we don't get Anaxis back, our entire reserve fleet will be nothing more than a pipe dream. Meanwhile, Tarkin is breathing down our necks, criticizing our tactics from the comfort of his hindsight. She's just such a..." "She's a good Jedi, and she follows her heart," Obi-Wan Kenobi said. "Just as you trained her to. It may not seem like it right now, but it will be warriors like Ahsoka who save the galaxy every bit as much as warriors like you and me will. You did well when mentoring her, even if she did absorb some of your more antagonistic qualities." Anakin cracked a smile at that as they both stopped, finally at the divide. "Well, I learned from the best," he said. "Huh, don't remind me," said Obi-Wan. They laughed for a short time before clasping each other's forearms and squeezing. "Make it back," Anakin said. Obi-Wan nodded. "May the Force be with us all," he said. Captain Yoren sputtered at the sight before him, feeling himself fluster even
ships are
beyond
just
what
so
he would normally feel
fucking
thanks
cool.
to the presence of the single guardian the Crimson
Excuse my
Razors had
language,
left
but just,
behind.
Love it.
First, he found their shields to be far more resilient than he had anticipated, far stronger than those encountered on their warships earlier. Had he deployed his torpedoes, had he ordered a full salvo to be fired, or even used the Nova Cannon proudly mounted on his prow, this would not be happening.
Calm yourself, Captain.
Said the observer.
Ugh.
We are far from any place where we could possibly resupply our munitions. Your choice to use the lances only was a prudent one.
To the captain's own shock, the words failed to salve any part of his wounded ego. "Guess I'm just a proud man," he thought bitterly. He could do nothing now but watch helplessly as swarms of smaller craft poured out of the now open blast doors on both space rocks. Fully half of them seemed to descend towards the unshielded planet, while the other cloud divided further. Even a second rain of bright red lance fire failed to penetrate the shields, though the blue spheres did begin to arch and bend at the contact. At this range, most escorts would have been singed or outright melted, meaning the shields on these rocks were absurdly strong, comparable to those found on other cruisers of similar size to his own. He watched in a rage as one cloud of craft adhered themselves directly onto his own beloved vessel, another cloud cutting its way towards the luminous rain, the escort which was currently docked with the Xenos escort, still being stripped clean of data and technology at the hands of Magos Zelv. The captain hoped the Dominus Skitarii guard would be able to see to his security, as the only other mobile escort in the area which had the chance to stop the boarding craft had been quickly tied up and engaged with a shimmering swarm of fighters, who were, even then, circling and attacking the frigate. "Radio down to the surface. Tell them they have invaders inbound," the captain barked in his mechanical voice. "And send the same message to the luminous rain. Warn them that the enemy is coming. Contact anti-boarding crews. Tell them to expect to earn their pay today." He then stood bolt upright as he heard the heavy scraping which signaled the rising of the guardian Davik Thune had left for him. He turned to see the single Astartes. "Are you going as well? Shouldn't you stay
single
here to guard the
Astartes.
bridge?"
Which is, in sometimes, enough.
he asked. The Space Marine turned around to face him, psychic power crackling around his face and head
Ooh,
as he
psychic.
smiled
Ah,
a cruel
shit.
smile. His armor was blue, unlike the majority of his chapter, and his helmet was an open metallic hood which linked into his skull via many cables.
This ain't just any Astartes.
The
dude.
Astartes had no bolter, save the bolt pistol at his side. Instead, his right hand clutched a glowing staff which hurt to look at.
Ooh, shit.
I suppose I should. Do you think your men can handle these intruders alone? They may need me,
He said. The captain thought about it, but his pride had already chosen his answer for him. My crew are fully capable. These softies and their toy soldiers won't be able to take 3 steps into my ship without returning to the void from whence they were spawned, he said. As if in punctuation of his point, the shields on the other 2 space rocks finally collapsed, and the lances cut into them, obliterating the drifting hulks in seconds. The Space Marine seemed to sag slightly, though he kept his smile.
if you say so. But do not mistake my nature, Captain. Though they may call me a librarian, you can depend on me to do more than read and advise for you,
The enormous warrior said. The captain nodded stiffly. Of that, he had no doubt. Ayla could feel her heart hammering in her chest, but outside she seemed calm, collected, alert. But in her mind, she could not help but think that these were the men who killed Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, and many others besides. She took some strength in the knowledge that she was far from alone. Nearby, Commander Bly gripped the handrail of their modified LAAT gunship, and their troopers were all around her.
Yeah.
Not only that, but Master Shaak Ti, one of the Order's most skilled and experienced duelists, was nearby as well, on a different ship. On top of that, as long as Hondo's intelligence remained accurate, they wouldn't even have to land under fire. The invaders had set up some defensive anti-air turrets and towers, but the spires and maze-like avenues of Axum made the approach to their target trivial, as long as they entered the city at a safe distance and stayed below a certain altitude. And yet, in spite of all that, she could still feel, deep within her, a call of doom, a chorus of death. But death not yet arrived, death in waiting. She had no idea what was causing her nerves. After all, she had faced death many, many times now. But as her transport began to set down on one of the wide golden arches of Azure City, it took all her willpower to shunt off the foreboding sense surrounding her and focus on the task before her. They disembarked, and her men began to form up as Shaak Ti approached. Ayla nodded towards her before tossing down a hollow disc. That pirate is annoyingly useful, Shaak Ti said with a sigh. Ayla nodded. I suppose that's why Ahsoka still works with him after he nearly sold her to the black market, she said. Shaak Ti nodded, but then started. Wait, he what? Afternoon, ladies, said a voice. Both Jedi turned to fully face the hologram of Quinlan Voss, who seemed to be crouching and looking over a ledge. We will be in position in less than 10. How about you two? He asked. I am about to begin the assault. I'll get their attention and then lead the first combat groups up through the main arches directly toward the temple gates as a diversion. Commander Bly will lead the second force on an assault of their field generator facilities nearby. Knocking out the power ought to soften up the gate defenses enough for me and the first group to punch through, at which point we will secure the gate and rendezvous with the second group before pushing forward into the temple proper, said Master Ayla. Shaak Ti stepped forward then to speak. Meanwhile, I will locate their local commander and bring down their command net. Moving alone, I will be able to traverse the defenses easily. The Force shall guide me. Once I have finished, I will regroup with Master Ayla and aid her in her forward push, said Master Shaak Ti. Voss nodded. Stellar! We can bet that they will call for help, and that help will come from the nearest bunker, our bunker. These guys don't pull punches, so they will probably bring in the big guns. Big guns mean broad avenues. Broad avenues mean ready-made ambush points, which me and the 2,000-some sabers I have with me will be taking full advantage of.
Oh my god.
They know we are coming, at least by now, so we should get moving quickly. Ayla said. Voss nodded again and stood. You're right, as usual. Start your attack, Ayla. Me and mine will be in place when the moment comes. Count on it. His image vanished, and the three got on their way. Bly and his men in the 2nd Clone Force, all 100,000 of them, were equipped with jetpacks, bark speeders, and city-modified ISP speeders. Light and fast, they would hit the enemy before they even understood what was happening, and Bly himself had become an old pro at this form of lightning strike raiding, with only the 501st rivaling the 322nd when it came to these kinds of high-stakes operations. That left Ayla with 235,500 troops of various kinds, and all the heavy armor. It had taken them almost...
Just to give you guys an idea of the scale of the force they're bringing with, is if I remember right, in the Battle of Geonosis, the first battle, like in episode 2, that I think that was their entire clone army was deployed in that battle, which was about 200,000 plus. So I give you an idea about how many of them are coming. It's a lot.
Almost 2 hours to actually reach the system, and in all that time, Ayla had been preparing herself and strategizing. At the beginning of the war, she would have made her armored charge nothing more than that, a full frontal charge, but now she knew much better. She watched on as more of the LAAT gunships of various configurations continued to fly in, dropping off their payloads of troopers, 3-legged sniper tanks, and 6-legged ATTE walkers. Soon, her army, her clones, had assembled themselves into large, square formations, 40 men deep and 40 men wide. CC-6221, nicknamed 65, came to stand beside her, serving as her lieutenant while Bly was gone. General, he said with a salute. She looked up at him briefly before returning her gaze to where it had been, now studying a holographic map of the city. She could charge straight down the widest avenues, using her armored columns to beat a path forward while supplying infantry to clear problem holdouts and to keep the feet of the walkers clear of any opportunistic saboteurs. But she had a different plan in mind. Lieutenant, I want you to pass these orders down. Have the sniper tanks take up their positions on the southern park square, here at Turek National Park, she said, indicating towards a diamond of elevated, artificially maintained forest. It was connected to the city around it by vast thoroughfares, 3 in particular. Its skyline was kept relatively clean, ostensibly to allow sunlight to fall onto the trees naturally throughout the day. According to the maps of the city, that should provide us with several clear firing arcs between the buildings which we can use to soften up the Dia defenses. Have the ATTEs take up their hidden pincer positions along these 3 main roads, and have the sappers heavily mine these 2, the Jedi Master said. Yes, sir, acknowledged 65. Oh, and Lieutenant, deploy 36 of our 146 battle groups to cover the tanks while they begin their artillery strikes. Hold the rest in reserve outside of the park area, just in case they manage to box it in, she added. Who do you want in command of the park group, and who will be in command of the reserve? He asked. I will hold the reserve. Once we have softened them up enough and drawn them out, I will order the advance under the cover of the artillery. If the force is with us, it will keep their heads down until we are knocking on their gates. You will be commanding the artillery group. At my signal, I want you to order the ATTEs forward to support our advance. Can you do that, 65? The clone snapped another hard salute. I was bred to do this, General. You can rely on me.
Dude, shit's starting to pick up, man. It's all converging together.
By the fury of his gaze, what on Terra are you doing? Sister Rajulia yelled. She stormed into the barracks, power armor whirring as she leveled her bolter, requiring all her patience and control not to pull the trigger and scythe down the guardsmen in her sight. The men, all dressed, armed, and waiting beside their footlockers, looked terrified, hands clutching their las rifles. Sister Palatine, said one of the sergeants. He came before her with a hurried half-walk, half-run, and saluted. Sister Palatine Rajulia Tandrick timed her blow unintentionally with the deep tremors of the assault, backhanding the sergeant just as he began to speak, her superhuman strength sending the man bleeding and reeling, sprawled onto the floor. Why are you cowering in this barracks? She demanded, aiming her weapon down at the man. We've been ordered. We've been under attack for nearly 8 minutes, and I struggle within myself to understand whether it is even possible for you to describe to me any situation in which I do not kill you for the dereliction of your duty. To the man's credit, he recovered quickly, not rising, but instead prostrating himself before the Sister of Battle. She made ready to kick him, to crush his organs beneath the ceramite boot of her powered sabaton. Sister, we are awaiting deployment orders, he said. She still kicked him, though not even half as hard as she had planned to. And you think that excuses your inaction? Go get your orders, soldier, she
The Imperium,
scolded.
man.
We tried, he cried out as she raised her boot over him. Major Fleckett left the barracks 4 minutes ago to ascertain Colonel Patron's will. We were ordered to wait and cover. The sister stomped down, but avoided the man's body, crushing the ferrocrete beneath her heel instead. Sergeant, consider yourself promoted to major until otherwise instructed by someone of equal or greater rank, she yelled over the booms of the artillery fire, which was, even then, hammering their
Congratulations,
position.
I beat the
The
shot
man
out of
looked
your
up,
promotion.
blood spilling from his mouth and nose, and yet looking more struck by the news of his sudden promotion than by any of the abuse she had laid into him. In part, this was because she technically did not have the authority to promote him, temporarily or otherwise. She was of a high rank, to be sure, but she was not part of his organization, strictly speaking. Rajulia did not care in the slightest, and as she cast her glare about the room, she had a strong suspicion that no one would question her orders, not here. She redirected her baleful stare back at the newly promoted, if utterly unofficial, major, and continued dispensing her will. Order the basilisk turrets to start returning fire. I do not care if their firing arcs are impeded by the buildings. Flatten them, clear the skyline if you have to, and get these men up and marching. I want that artillery column flattened before another 10 minutes rolls around. I don't care what you need to get it done. Just get it done. Without another word, she spun around and exited the barracks, her face a mask of near berserk rage. 2 of her seraphim were waiting outside for her, each one ready for battle,
the armor,
their
dude.
flight packs sparking and sputtering
So cool,
flames,
so cool.
ready to send them skyward at a second's notice. They turned their helmed faces to regard her. What is their excuse? Asked one. What are our orders? Asked the other. Both sounded eager, even as Sister Rajulia shoved past. Get your squads ready to repel the invaders at the gates. Pull the reserves we have guarding the generators and requisition points. Call back all patrols, and one of you make sure that Sanctus Commands knows that we are under attack, she ordered, still moving. As you order, sister, they both said in unison, though only one left. What are you waiting for? Sister Rajulia asked. Well, I was going to ask you 2 things before rallying the gate's defenses, she said. Then ask and be done with it, Rajulia scolded. The Seraphim warrior nodded and proceeded. Should we contact the Tempestus Scions? They have a field base only a few clicks away. The Sister Palatine almost paused as she considered the option. No, I don't think, she started to say. She was cut off as a Durasteel shell slammed into one of the anti-aircraft towers several meters away. Where the blaster technology of these natives had thus far failed to impress, their artillery was a whole different story entirely.
Probably, baby.
On second thought, Rajulia said, call them in. Emperor willing, we won't need them, but from the density of these salvos, I'm doubting that more and more. And where are you yourself going, Sister Palatine? The gate is not in that direction, said the remaining seraphim. Where else? The commanding sister barked. I'm going to the command post to force these idiots to take some kind of action. Now go! You have orders to relay. The seraphim nodded and kicked off of the ground, arching into the air on wings of fire as she sped to do her duty. Sister Palatine jogged the rest of the way to the command post, angrily tapping her access code into the oversized number pad displayed on the bright green console outside the post. It took her 2 tries to get it open, stomping inside, seeing all the men at their consoles, the major and the colonel standing at the center of the room, both men looking down at something on a central table between them. What in the Emperor's holy name do you think you are doing? She roared.
Her frenzy peaked as she fully absorbed what she was seeing, and before anyone in the room could react, she squeezed the trigger of her bolter, rocketing micro-missiles from the weapon at her hip and blasting craters into the control consoles. The men who had been sitting at their stations were blown into bloody smears. Even the two officers were not spared, strafed with the others and sent falling to pieces over the table they had been looking
Oh,
at.
what an idiot,
She
dude.
spun on her heel, completing a half circle of carnage before the bolt mag in her gun emptied and slid out, colliding with the hard ground with a bell's clear chime, smoking and red hot. To most, this seemed like madness, but the sister knew from the moment she had entered that this was the only appropriate answer. Where most would have entered and seen only a room of silent men, she had instantly seen a room of dead men. The shredded torsos of both officers hung in the air as if suspended on invisible wires, their lower bodies and arms having fallen away. The sister threw her bolter down as their corpses finally began to fall, as they should have done all along. She reached down to her belt, drawing forth her blessed power maul, activating it. "I said, what do you think you are doing?" she yelled as she spun around. Shakti's blue blade collided with the head of her power maul, activating its power field and causing a pulse which repelled the Jedi. She kept her balance, her blade before her in a ready posture as she faced down the canny warrior sister who had barged into the aftermath of her mission. "Xeno scum!" Sister Rajulia spat, raising her weapon in one hand while she reached for the bolt pistol at her waist with the other. Shakti narrowed her eyes. She had been hoping to escape as silently as she had entered, and had hoped again when she had heard the sister trying to enter the command post that her distraction would have proven enough to allow this to be finished with a single decisive blow. But the ferocity and swiftness of Rajulia's response had caught even Shakti off guard, and now there seemed no other choice than to engage in a duel she needed to win quickly, lest she be lured into yet more undesired combat.
Damn. It's picking up. Let's go, dude.
Sergeant Kalak Norn never relaxed. His blood pressure had been too high because of it. Medicaid had told him he'd die early. Hospitlar even offered him pills, but in the end, he settled for the certainty of steel. A pump system installed into his back, a blood pressure regulator. No need to remember prescriptions or rely on supply drops now. Just get checked up by the Omnissiahs chosen, and you're good to go. Because Sergeant Kalak Norn never relaxed. He didn't have time to count pills or rely on them, and he certainly never had time for downtime. Stress wouldn't kill you half as fast as the bugs would, or the greenskins. Oh, the greenskins. Out of the two, he actually found the latter to be more terrifying. The Tyranids were just animals, hungry, ravenous animals. But the orcs... No, never relax. That's what he was thinking. That was what he was reminding himself of when he noticed it. The sound. He was behind the fortifications, which were mostly composed of thick, flashed-cast ferrocrete walls which insulated the area. The vehicle bays, Mechanicus shrines, and field generators had all been landed and constructed here, so there were plenty of noises in the air. But this noise was not the warbling buzz of the power generators, nor was it the binaural drone of the priests communicating their sermons to the machines. It wasn't even the repeated, shuddering booms and blasts of the enemy artillery, which had been pounding away at the walls and taller fortifications for several minutes now. It sounded almost like jets, or rather, jump packs. At the realization of this, Kalak, who had been sitting on a crate listening to his squad babble on about inconsequential things while they relaxed, threw himself back, scattering his rations from his lap and hands as he snapped out his lasgun. Holding the rifle up, starting to sight it even before his back thudded against the hard floor beneath him. "Raid! Aerial raid!" Kalak bellowed, opening fire even as the first syllable left his mouth. His squad did as he did, throwing themselves onto their backs or knees as they aimed up, firing before they even knew what they were firing at, not questioning the well-honed instinct of their sergeant. But he knew. Looking up, his vision was filled with three things: the bright blue sky which framed everything, the gray and silver shapes of the spires around them, stretching as if to hold that vast tapestry up above them, and the white and yellow armor of thousands of descending clones. They had scaled the surrounding spires,
dope.
using them as cover to get far above them before descending in a surprise raid. While some squads near them took his hint and did as his men did, not nearly enough aped his reaction to make a large difference. Commander Bly and his jet troopers opened fire using their DC-15A blaster rifles, each set to maximum charge. The rifles
Which
were
are
rarely
quite powerful.
used by jet troopers or even most clone troopers due to their weight, but after having been briefed on the last encounters with Imperial forces, the clones had chosen to favor firepower over convenience, and it served them well now. The sergeant rolled and scrambled after having unloaded a hefty spray of his las fire into the sky, narrowly avoiding the returning fire sent at him. Looking around, he spotted a parked set of vehicles less than 12 meters away, a Taurox and a Chimera. He grinned a manic grin, and then flinched as a nearby pile of munitions took a stray shot and exploded, wiping out the 8 men who had been standing around it, but none of his men. "All right, you lazy sludge! Up to the Chimera, now!" he bellowed, scrambling to his feet, las rifle clutched in both hands. He didn't look back to see if his men were following. He didn't survive out till now by being the kind of man who looked back. He just had to trust that they would follow, or trust that they were better off without those who could not follow. He ducked his head as the clones broke over the top of the secondary base, splitting into squads of 6 and sweeping about, hunting the guardsmen below them with sprays of focused fire. "Where is the damn commander?" cried Pickvet in his Rushlander accent. "How the horror should I know?" yelled Carrack as he came to the door of the Chimera. He looked at it again, his eyes growing wide. Most Chimeras had turreted multi-las mounted on top of them, which would have been help enough, but not this one. This one had a beautiful heavy bolter. It only made his spirits fall all the harder as he tried to open the door and found it locked. "Ah, demons!" he cursed, turning back to face his squad. "All right, try all the doors! Hurry up!" he called, and the men scrambled to try, but no sooner had they started pulling on the handles before they were noticed. Terran and Jalasta both died, peppered suddenly by a shower of blue bolts. They jerked and spasmed with each shot, their bodies cooking even as they fell. Kalak took aim and fired, and for the first time noticed with growing horror the effect his shots were having. One of his shots struck a trooper in the forearm. Normally, that would have been enough to blow the arm clean off, but instead, the white armor wrapped around his bicep turned black and began to smoke and deform like burnt plastic. The man shuddered, clearly feeling it, but also clearly retaining the use of his struck arm.
This purse is a lot of
Kalak's
energy.
next shot struck another in the back, and this one did not even react, his armor blackening in a foot-wide circle and smoking like the armor of the other clone had. "Creed's fucking tits!" the sergeant cursed. "Cover, cover, cover! Get under that Taurox! Now, guardsmen, move!"
Blast
He
sword, man.
screamed as he saw the jetpack soldiers coming back around with friends. His men stopped pulling on the doors and broke into a full run, chasing after Kalak as he dove and slid on the hard artificial ground, the last of his men narrowly avoiding a cascade of blue bolts which pinged and sizzled against the hull of the Taurox above them. They were crammed underneath the profile of the truck-like APC. "They're surrounding us! They're going to land!" Kalak barked. "Roll around, you wretches! Rifles out! All directions! Make a wheel, damn it!" His men obeyed, scrambling around each other in a tangle of bodies as they arranged themselves into nothing you could call a circle, but something certainly approaching 360 degrees of coverage. Then they waited, watching, listening. All around them they could see, but more than that, hear the carnage being meted out to their fellow guardsmen. Perhaps if their anti-air towers had all still been operational, this kind of assault could have been averted, but many minutes prior, the enemy artillery had begun lobbing rounds at them. They seemed unwilling to strike certain targets, perhaps because the buildings were in the way, but that only left them with 3 of their 8 anti-air defense turrets intact when the attack had started. And as soon as the white-clad toy soldiers had gotten near enough to the ground, those defenses had become their first targets. The sounds of explosions rolled through the hidden guardsman, deafening the unaugmented men among his squad and shaking the ground beneath them. Damn, that'd be the tanks on B patrol, said Private Granger, who had gotten lucky and was laying on top of more of his squad than were laying on top of him. Oh, Thrones, this ain't right. You saw the armor. Drank my shots right up, it did, said Private Regin, who was trembling despite the 3 bodies pinning him, struggling to keep his sights steady. Private Janice groaned angrily. Oi, Farnes, get your damn boots up my ass! The clones landed, grenades held and ready to be rolled, and the guardsmen fired. Now, Kalik could not claim his men were veterans. Not all of them, anyway. He, Janice, Gala, and Turquoise were all veterans, at least by now, but his squad was a hefty mix, even before they had been further mixed in with all the other regimental units after the big jump. But if there was one thing he could claim, it was that his men were well drilled, because he drilled them himself. No shots flew wide, and those that missed their mark were quickly compensated for, the lasguns flashing like tactical strobes, pegging the clones surrounding them many times in mere milliseconds. More importantly, Kalik and the more experienced members of his squad had aimed for the grenades. He was pleased to see, just before he landed his own shots, that once blackened, the toy soldiers' armor seemed to provide them no protection at all. The tagged clones screamed only briefly, shins, thighs, and arms bursting into superheated explosions of blackened gore before all being swept away by the explosions of the grenades in their hands or going off right beside them. 2 troopers did manage to roll their explosives under the Taurox, something Kalik managed to catch from the corner of his eye. 2 hot ones under the truck! Toss 'em! Toss 'em! He yelled, lips moving as quickly as he could while still being understandable. 3 of his men, Private Yara Tolza, Private Pikvit Jorkan, and Corporal Turquoise, scrambled out on hands and knees from under the vehicle, making a dash for other cover. Other cover they never reached. Yara was a dolt. She had chosen to try to run for the overhang at the walls, which would have barely provided her any real cover at all. What's more, she had to cross several meters of open terrain, and doing so was an invitation to get shot, an invitation many of the toy soldiers took, peppering her with their blue bolts. At least her death seemed quick, unlike Private Pikvit, who ran for the vehicle bays. Perhaps because he had scrambled out after Yara, or perhaps the clones had simply known it was coming, but the jet troopers did not open fire on him. Instead, 3 speeding shapes suddenly swept through the open ground between the bays and the Taurox.
Speeders?
What Kalik had initially taken to be missiles were actually men on speeder bikes, and while 2 missed him, the center bike clipped the running soldier, sending him spinning and broke into the ground, where he lay, stunned for a moment before he began to scream. For whatever reason, the toy soldiers did not feel inclined to finish the work of their speeders. But the true tragedy lay with the corporal, for Turquoise had not been running like a coward, but had been using the opportunity provided by the other 2 to make a dash back toward the Chimera. It had not been jet troopers or speeder bikes that killed her, but simply sheer rotten luck. Private Farnes had just been doing his duty, just doing as he had been instructed. Had no way of knowing he was going to toss out the enemy explosive right out into her path. The explosion went off, and Turquoise was sent flying, colliding with a thud and a crunch into the side of the Chimera, falling to the ground and remaining there, completely still. Farnes began to say. Stow it, Farnes! You didn't mean it! Take your crisis on your own time and help me save those who are left! Kalik ordered. But Sarge... I said stow it! Another word and I will blame you for that. Now, eyes out. I'm assuming from the fact that we're all still alive that we cleared all of those hot potatoes. Yeah? Squad report! Clear, said Farnes. Clear, said Gala. Good here, said Granger. Throne. Clear, stuttered Regin. Clear, said Janice. Right. Throne, that's half the damn squad already. You lot better not disappoint me any further by tossing out your lives so cheaply. You copy? Copy. Yes, right, Sarge. All right, now shove it. They'll be back, so keep your eyes sharp while I try to figure this out. Calic barked. He looked out and around from under the vehicle. It didn't look good, and the sergeant couldn't spot any bulwarks or lines being drawn anywhere near them. If their forces were rallying somewhere, it wasn't where they were at, and he had a sneaking suspicion that every second they stayed trapped under this Taurox only made them more and more isolated from the rest of their forces. He could still see men fighting and dying, even tech priests trying in vain to save their sacred machines, but it was little more than a frenzied rout. His eyes found the body of his corporal again, and he swallowed hard. What had she been thinking? Had she really gambled her life on the chance that the Chimera's passenger door would be open? No, he couldn't believe that. Turquoise had been far too clever for that. She had been a hiver in her life before the guard, and she always had a plan. He looked at the Chimera again, trying to see what she had seen, and nearly smacked himself when he spotted it. The turret. The heavy bolter turret sitting at the top of the Chimera. Its hatch was open. Regin, Gala, pop smoke and toss them east and west. We're going to rush the Chimera, Calic ordered. But it's locked, Janice said. The damn doors are locked, but the turret hatch is open. I'll get up there and open it all the way, then hop down. Everyone move down the damn Chimera. Make room for everyone else. We're getting the hell out of here. You slugs ready? Asked Sergeant Calac. Damn right, Sarge. Then pop the damn smoke and get ready to move on my mark. They did as ordered, and he waited, listening to the smoke hissing as it escaped the two canisters, watching as the edge of his sight was quickly filled by the shifting clouds of smoke. He waited and waited, taking his best possible mental image of the vehicle, its rear facing towards him. And then, gathering his courage and energy into an explosive burst, he began to advance. Move, move, he called. First, he crawled on his hands and knees until he was sure that he was out from beneath the Taurox, and then he climbed to his hands and feet and began to run. He let his rifle hang from his harness by its shoulder strap, both arms extended out in front of him, cushioning his body as he ran into the back hatch of the Chimera. Knowing it was locked, he blindly fumbled in the smoke, moving to the right side and finding the tank treads of the vehicle. He dug his fingers into the seams in the rough tracks and hauled himself up and out of the smoke. Briefly, he had a clearer view of the battle. It was every bit as bad as he had feared. The fact that he and his squad had been attacked when they were cycled out to eat and rest told him that it was likely the whole camp had been hit by the attack, and these toy soldiers knew how to identify and prioritize targets. He didn't waste too much time ogling their sweeping jetpack strikes and lightning-fast bike raids, instead climbing over to the hatch that led into the Chimera and prying it all the way open. He climbed inside the tight confines of the APC, getting down into the wider main body of the vehicle and getting on one of the last guns mounted onto the sides. The sergeant peered through one of the thin slits in the armor, which provided him with just enough sight of the outside as he swiveled the weapon in its mount and began to fire. His crew began to drop in one by one, and while Janice took a shot in the left shoulder and dropped into the APC, cursing and spitting, he was alive, and that would have to do. Regin, take a look at Janice, and be quick. I need you both on these las guns. He spat. Gala, get up in that bolter turret and start laying down some real fire. See if you can clear us a way out. She nodded and climbed up into the turret controls without another word. Farnes, get in that driver's seat and wake this thing's machine spirit. We needed to get us out of here before we are overrun. Farnes nodded and scrambled into the driver's seat, humming something to himself as he began to put his training to work. Granger, get your hands on that last gun opposite me. You, me, and Gala are gonna buy Farnes enough time to get us out of here, Calac said as he turned away from them, looking back through the slit in the armor and taking aim. He began to fire, and soon Granger and Gala joined him, though it was the latter that made the biggest difference by far. As Gala loaded the belt of heavy bolter rounds into her turret gun and sealed the doors above her securely, the turret suddenly transformed into a blistering storm of thundering death. The iconic barking of bolter shells filled the air in a near hum of continuous output. Gala smiling to herself and then screaming triumphantly as she began to strafe the line of bolts across the hovering and flying clones nearby. Watching as flying clones in both pristine white armor and blackened smoking armor became nothing more but sprays of limbs and organs as she dragged the snaking trail of her weapon across every cluster of clones she could spot. Meanwhile, Calac and Granger, as well as Regin and Janice soon after, speared clones out of the sky with focused volleys of lasfire, shooting men off of their speeders and sending the bikes flaming and careening into the nearby terrain. Their counterattack was going well, but they had no hope of actually driving off the whole assault with just one chimera. "Harness! Movement now!" Calac roared from his position on the last gun. I can't! It won't move!" The guardsman called back, panic riddling his voice. "Why the hell not? Don't tell me this thing doesn't have the fuel for it!" Calac said, looking down at one of the bulbous fuel tanks which partially protruded from the floor near his feet. He kicked it, and the sound it made didn't sound empty. "No, Sarge, it isn't that at all. This chimera is keyed to one of the tech priests around here. It won't start without their access code." The sergeant wiped at his face, feeling himself aging to death by the second. "Then start guessing codes," Calac ordered. "What?" asked Farnes, incredulous. "You heard me, Private! Either you get this thing moving, or we all die in this box! So start guessing!" Farnes looked down at the console before him, particularly the number pad he had to use to dial the code in. He felt all the blood draining out of him as he swallowed hard. "Oh, Omnissiah, please have mercy upon this machine of flesh and bone, who seeks only to do your will. Please send upon us the motive force, and awaken the servant of the Emperor to ferry us to safety. In your holy name I pray." The guardsman began to mutter as he typed in the first of many attempts, trying to ignore the more and more desperate sounds of his comrades behind him. "Oh, machine God, in your name I pray, please send salvation unto the servants of your will." He continued as he began the second attempt.
That just went from like 0 to 100 like that. Like that was intense, dude. Now we got the separatists now.
Rex grit his teeth, keeping his head down as he crouched behind the stack of thick Durasteel crates, pistols out and in each hand. He and Ahsoka had split up with the intention of dividing the enemy's attention. And it seemed to have worked, though he now found himself held up from their rendezvous point. It was these new forms of Imperials. Rex had faced a Space Marine, and he had been briefed by his brothers in the 501st about the Imperial Guard. But these things were neither. Robed in red, wielding bizarre and powerful weapons, and more machine than men, these combatants were of a whole different breed. Rex had begun to divide them up between two general varieties. The dumb, lumbering kind, which, though being far more heavily armed than most things the Confederacy ever bothered deploying, were just as slow and easy to outmaneuver as any B-1s. And the smart, faster kind, which wore the red robes and behaved more like commando droids, though their precision and teamwork were on a whole different level. Even now, one of the big lumbering ones was positioned at the end of this hallway, using an enormous heavy weapon to keep the heads of him and his men down, and popping any who dared rise. Meanwhile, the robed warriors crouched on mechanical limbs, eyes glowing as they sighted down their bizarre weapons. As if to remind him of their presence, they fired again. "Get down!" Rex yelled, while the lumbering ones sprayed weapons fire everywhere without care for accuracy. The robed ones never took shots that didn't at least come deathly close to striking home. He watched two troopers near him who had been, so far as he could tell, safely behind cover, as the shots ricocheted off the nearby walls, striking one clone in the stomach and the other in the shin. The effect was the same.
Damn.
They screamed as electricity coursed through them, silencing as they went rigid still. Rex turning away as their struck body parts exploded in an electrical shower of gore. This could not go on. The 501st were bleeding troopers like crazy in these hard points, and they couldn't rely on Ahsoka or Anakin, or any Jedi for that matter, to bail them out. Anakin wasn't even on the ship, him and the Bad Batch having taken the fight to the enemy destroyer with an eye for seizing the bridge. Ahsoka, on the other hand, was on board but not nearby. They had split up to cover more ground, hoping to confuse the enemy with the tactic. It evidently had not worked very well, at least not for him and his half of the men. Ahsoka had taken Echo to seize the comm vaults, whereas he himself was tasked with taking the bridge, a mission which seemed more and more impossible by the second.
Crazy,
He peeked
dude.
out, but try as he might, he simply could not see another way. They could retreat, but doing that would only cede this passageway to them, a passage they had already bled hard to take, and which was not easily circumvented, and certainly not quickly avoided. Backing out would be the same as admitting defeat. They needed to push through, and they needed to do it within the next few minutes, or the enemy would bunker down beyond their ability to breach. "We're gonna rush 'em," Rex said, feeling cold spikes trace along his spine. "Are you crazy?" asked one trooper nearby. "Captain, that heavy weapons fire will turn us into mulch. The back of the hallway is moments from blowing out into space," another argued. "And that's why we have to keep moving. The longer we stay pinned here, the worse our position will become," the captain said, waving more of the men
Not wrong,
behind them
but-
up, who crawled forward at the gesture, using the cover or advancing up alcoves until the exploding rain of bullets became too dense. "Pass the shields up, now troopers!" Rex ordered. They did, passing the large rectangular shields up and over themselves in a train until all the frontmost clones had access to one. "Blast it, Rex! These shields won't take even a single shot from what that heavy weapon is spitting. We're going to get cut to pieces!" said Boomer, who was on his stomach under a blast shield not far away. "You're going to have to trust me. Get your flashbangs and EMP grenades ready. No more arguing. I'll take point. Toss, count, charge, and shoot," he ordered. Rex swallowed hard, pushing down all thoughts of death, of the wounds he knew would kill him if any of those weapons struck him. The clones had never been as effective at fighting flesh and bone defense forces. The captain had always known that. But these droid men were quickly proving more lethal in every way than the most dedicated rebel or dastardly insurgent. "Now, for the Republic!" Rex bellowed. The clones tossed their flashbangs, made specifically to interfere with optic sensors by using EM wave bursts, among other more conventional methods. They flashed and screeched loudly, but Rex waited a moment, his instincts holding him back. A stream of bolt rounds hammered into his cover, and then off and away in the direction he had planned to jump towards. The droidmen had anticipated that, but this time experience trumped equations, and he leapt out, rolling and dodging as bright blue shots fired from the bizarre, antique-looking rifles that the robed men were using. He narrowly avoided the shots, keeping his motion constant as he came up to his feet smoothly and jumped again, this time extending both of his pistols and firing. His first shot hit dead center, blowing away the face of the lumbering cyborg.
Damn.
It continued emptying its heavy weapon, even as it staggered, headless, before falling over, blowing itself to pieces as it fell forward onto its own barrel. The robed man, who was Rex's second target, ducked the shot, firing his own weapon but shooting wide, evidently still blinded, at least to a degree. The droid men opened fire, and Rex rolled as he hit the ground again, this time unable to preserve his momentum and falling heavily. He braced for the shot he knew was coming, but was shielded at the last second by Jesse, who blocked the shot with his
Jesse.
blast shield. The bullet tinked loudly against the insulated
R.I.P.
metal, but otherwise seemed entirely negated. Jesse extended a hand, which Rex took, wasting no time in getting back up. The 501st advanced up the hallway, blast shields forming a triple-layered wall, one trooper holding up the shield while two others took shots from around it. The three robed droid men began to retreat, moving swiftly on double-jointed bionic legs, but taking fire as they did. Rex smiled, more than a little happy to see that, as effective as their weapons were against him and his men, the Republic was still not entirely without kick. Their blaster bolts, as slow as they were, and as ineffective against the Astartes as they had been, proved extremely lethal to all these droid men.
Yep.
The ionized blasts seemed to wreak havoc with their extensive augmentations, a thing Rex was all too eager to exploit as two of the retreating warriors dropped, twitching and convulsing like roaches, the clones surrounding them and pumping them full of blue death. Still, while it was an advantage, it was a cold comfort when compared to the losses they were taking. And then they turned the corner. the one leading towards the bridge turbo lift. Facing the clones were 3 lines of droid men. The first layer was composed of a shambling, bulky front line of cyborgs.
Ugh.
Their arms had been replaced with massive pincers and sparking hammers, and their eyes seemed mindless and determined as death itself. Behind them, one row of robed, lithe droid men kneeled, weapons out in ordered rows. Rex saw some of the same rifles as the ones they had struggled with up till now, but mixed in with those were a plethora of other,
looking, dude.
varied and often glowing weapons. They were kneeling stock still as a second line of identical soldiers rested the barrels of their own weapons against the stiff soldiers of the first line. Keep going! Keep going! Close the distance! Rex yelled, charging behind Jesse's shield to the far left as the 501st charged and opened fire on the formation. The front line of droid men lurched into a mindless countercharge, and were nearly all wiped out by the volleys of fire which came out for them. One
Let's
managed
represent.
by sheer dumb luck to stumble around the bolts sent after it, and reached the line of blast shields. With a single swing of its massive claw, it crushed the nearest shield and the trooper behind it before the cyborg was force-fed the barrel of a DC-15A, which put the flesh and metal amalgamation out of its misery. More shields moved up to cover the breach instantly, but it did little good. Rex had been shooting past the front line all along, into the second and third line of the enemy, knowing it was with them that the real threat could be found. But they were fearless, even as he killed them, and when the final frontline cyborg had fallen, they opened fire. It was chaos and death in seconds, as the variety of different, obscene
Jeez.
weapons dispensed hell into the first and second lines of the advancing troopers. Arc rifles struck the insulated shields like lightning bolts, deafening and burning the clones nearby, and through each gap that was created, more servitor bullets slung in, coated in blue as they struck more clones, stealing their potential energy before causing an electrical explosion at the impact site. But these were the lightest of the armaments. Bright, hellish phosphorus rounds, burning white-hot, began to clack and clink against the shields, burning their way through to the troopers behind them after a few volleys. Oh, the screaming. There was suddenly so much screaming. The room became swelteringly hot, Rex feeling heat press into him despite his armor as thick bolts of plasma fired from several of the glowing weapons. The globular volleys were easily enough to melt an ATTE down to its legs, and as it splashed into the rightmost ranks of the shield formation, its lethal potential was put on stark display as it liquefied the shields, troopers, and hallway present there. Had they been close to the skin of the ship, they would have surely been vented into space. Rex found himself floundering as he felt the shield he was shooting around start to heat up as bright yellow projectiles began to rain down on it. What was the right answer? Retreat? Charge? Hold position? Rex was not confident they would survive any of those outcomes. "This is turning into Geonosis all over again!" Jesse bellowed through the din of screams and weapons fire. No, Rex thought to himself as he and Jesse were suddenly tossed aside by the force of an explosion 5 meters away. This is much worse than Geonosis, he thought numbly, pinned under the shield with Jesse as other bodies fell on top of and over them. After a second,
Dude.
he tried to shove himself out from under the pile, hearing Jesse groan next to him and thankful he was still alive. But he was helplessly pinned. All he could do was manage to extract his arms and keep shooting with both pistols from his position on the ground. Luckily, his fellow clones did not pause to look to him for further orders. He had already given them orders. Howling in pain as they stepped through molten metal and the
Fire the first,
slimy
baby.
remains of their brothers, the clones kept up the charge. They tossed flashbangs and EMP grenades to try to disrupt the consistent, accurate fire which was devastating their advance. But the droid men shot these down mid-flight, now all too aware of their efficacy, eye lenses shuttering closed and then open in the moments when the flashbangs went off. The 501st weren't making any headway.
Damn.
Rex, are you alright? Rex suddenly felt someone grasp his arm and begin hauling him up. It was Korik, and Rex barely managed to pull the trooper down beside him in time to avoid a crackling spear of electrical death. "I'm fine, Korik. Keep your head down." Rex ordered, shooting 2 droidmen in the face, stopping them from coating him and Korik in explosive bullets. "Blast it! I'd strangle a Jedi for a few blaze troopers right about now!" Korik complained, shielding himself behind a half-melted blast shield that lay nearby, jamming his rifle through the damaged gap and firing as he spoke. He, Rex, and many other dying and fighting clones shot volleys, both precise and scattered, back at the droidmen. Those struck would either weather the blow, suffering from twitches, spasms, but no obvious pain, or they would drop, falling into violent, rending contortions. After falling, they would be replaced, those in the second row kneeling to take the positions of the first, while a third row of obscured forces stepped in from behind to replace those of the second row.
Jeez
This was a
Louise.
meat grinder for both sides, given how effective their weapons were on the strange biology of the droidmen, but it was far, far worse for the 501st. "I'd strangle a few blaze troopers for a Jedi right about now," was Rex's answer to Korik, and, like a prayer, his answer
That's so
was
valid, dude.
answered. From above and behind the 2
Ahsoka?
lines of droidmen, 2 familiar bars of blue light penetrated
there
from
it
the
is.
floor
There she
above them.
is.
They spun, creating a
Ahsoka
perfect
Tano.
circle of rent metal, then withdrew. The cork of Durasteel was pushed down into the center of the 2 lines of robed droidmen, crushing several beneath it before tens of EMP grenades rained down from the hole in the ceiling. The droidmen reacted with little confusion and near instantaneous motion, starting to retreat, but they were still not quick enough, their forward lines screeching out in mechanical pain as they were enveloped in the expanding globes of electromagnetic waves. Most of them had been proofed against conventional EMP and similar radiation, but the exotic technologies of the clones handedly overcame these standard defenses. The clones gave a cheer and charged, and this time when Kolick went to help Rex up, he let him. Rex took a moment to make sure a medic got to the still unconscious Jesse before checking himself for wounds and joining the rush of the counter-assault.
Hell yeah.
Ahsoka dropped from the ceiling as soon as the grenades had detonated, scything her way into the retreating droidmen with both sabers. Her half of the 501st began to rappel and drop down from the hole after her, opening fire all the while. With cries of, "For the Commander!" and "For the Republic!" the 501st managed to push the enemy forces all the way back to the turbo lift that led up to the final approach into the bridge. The lift had been shut down, but they had Echo working on it and expected to have it back online in minutes. Rex sighed and leaned against the wall, taking off his helmet and wiping at the heavy sweat which coated his brow. The ship air was now cool against his scalp, whereas before it had been like an oven. He sighed, taking his rest while he had the chance. "Well, you don't seem too broken up about the stall." Rex opened his eyes and saw Ahsoka approaching, a cautious smile lighting her face. He smiled back, not denying it. "Truth be told, Commander, I think we need the rest. I have never been part of a boarding action as frantic as this. I keep thinking we should have come more prepared, but prepared with what? I couldn't very well let the men bring PLXs into a boarding action, right?" Ahsoka crossed her arms and nodded. "I know what you mean. I've had to use every trick in my book to get us out this far, and we are still losing more men than is acceptable. They fight almost like droids, but competently," he finished for her,
That's the
and she
scary part
nodded
about
again.
it.
"How were the comm Were you and Echo able to patch into the ship from there?" he asked. She shook her head. "The comm are completely stripped clean. Most of the physical machinery is gone, and what's left has been wiped and nearly completely disconnected from the ship. They didn't even bother to defend them, at least not any more fiercely than any other part of the ship. It looks like you ended up getting the worst of it in that regard," the former Padawan said, rubbing her arm and looking away, ashamed to have left her friend in such a desperate situation. Rex laughed, causing Ahsoka to look up. "If that's the case, then I'm glad," he said, straightening up off the wall. She looked at the captain quizzically. "Why's that?" she asked. A sudden loud beep caught all of their attention, both Rex and Ahsoka and the many clones
the
around
regular
them.
beat drop.
Echo stood up and away from the input slot he had been using, looking up at the lift as the active light flicked on. "Okay, that should do it," he called. Rex grinned and put on his helmet, looking at Ahsoka. "I was honestly afraid they would have their own version of a Jedi, that you would be the one dealing with that without me. If this is all they have, then we can still take them down." he said, hefting his 2 blaster pistols. Ahsoka nodded, but then frowned, her eyes widening in a look Rex had seen too many times before. Jedi were clairvoyant. They got these feelings. Got a bad feeling? He asked. She activated her lightsabers in response as the lift doors opened.
It's not. Don't tell me
Rex
that,
and his
dude.
troopers took up positions, but his heart still sank when he saw what had come for them. The lift was packed with more of the robed droid men, the confines bristling with the nozzles, dishes, and barrels of their assorted weapons. But there, in the center of it all, holding some bizarre, cog-themed staff, which seemed to spark with power, stood a robed, blue-skinned figure. He stepped forward, stave in hand, his eyes wrapped and hidden behind black bandages. Tattoos of silver, which seemed to be in the likeness of circuitry, covered every inch of his skin they could see, which increased drastically as he tossed aside his robe, leaving himself bare-chested before them and revealing the encompassing extent of his markings.
Do not fear and do not despair,
he called out to them.
I am a holy priest of the motive force, and I have come to tell you that even though you must now fall before our sacred forms, I shall gather and preserve your potential energy. Nothing shall be wasted.
The odd priest bellowed, sparks raining from his skin.
And know that to die before the servants of the Omnissiah is a blessing within itself.
And with that, the man smacked his staff against the floor, and all the lights within the corridor died in an instant. And as the lights died, the screaming began again.
Start opening fire, man. Holy shit. That was amazing, man. That's everything I wanted and some. That was absolutely phenomenal, dude. I mean, just to see the two forces finally clash and have a proper battle, and just to see the Republic not like pull any punches was amazing, because when their blasters are on full power, man, those things hit almost like a las gun, if not maybe in some cases even harder. So, yeah, man. I mean, it was cool. It was cool to see just how the Republic trying to change their tactics and trying to really look at this new enemy and be like, these guys are something you don't want to mess with. These aren't just some mindless droids that are programmed with basic function just to shoot in a straight line. Like these foes have conscience. They're not dumb. They're experienced. So to kind of see that and to kind of start seeing it come full circle is really dope. So I enjoy this episode. It's probably this is easily the best episode so far. It's not even close. So I highly enjoy this episode. I hope you guys enjoy as much as I did. Like always, please check out the original creator in the description. If you guys enjoy my content, if you guys enjoy my reactions, please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you guys next one. Take it easy.